Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday afternoon, the kind of steady Oregon rain that turned the world soft and gray. Harry Calder sat at the dining table he'd built himself, running his thumb along the edge of a small leather notebook. The wood grain beneath his forearms was smooth from countless meals, countless conversations that now felt hollow in retrospect. He'd spent 3 months on this table, reclaimed oak from a barn in Eugene. He remembered Jean laughing at him for the obsession, asking why he couldn't just buy furniture like normal people. But Harry wasn't normal people. He was the kind of man who needed to understand how things fit together, how weight distributed, how structures held or failed. Now he understood that marriages could fail the same way buildings did. Not all at once, but through small compromises and integrity that went unnoticed until the collapse. The notebook was filled with his handwriting, neat and measured. Crib measurements calculated to the quarter inch. A list of hiking trails around Willow Creek rated by difficulty and scenic value. He planned to start with the easy ones, work up to the challenging climbs as his daughter grew. There was a page titled Values to Teach, with entries like honesty, resilience, and respect underlined twice. His daughter. Except she wasn't his daughter. Harry closed the notebook slowly, his jaw tight. Outside, the pines swayed in the wind, their tops disappearing into low clouds. Willow Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were supposed to be impossible. Houses sat far enough apart for privacy, close enough for borrowed cups of sugar. It was the kind of place people moved to for safety, for community, for raising families. The front door opened with a gust of wet air. Jean stepped inside, shaking rain from her coat. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women had. Dark hair, quick smile, eyes that sparkled when she told a story. 7 years ago, Harry had fallen for that charm. He believed in it completely. "Mom's coming over," Jean said, hanging her coat on the hook Harry had installed last winter. "She wants to finalize some details for the shower." Harry nodded, but didn't look up from his notebook. When 20 minutes, Jean moved to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. "Can you try to be, engaged? She's really excited about this." Engaged. Harry almost laughed. He'd been engaged for 7 years, engaged to a marriage, a future, a family that turned out to be fiction. "I'll do my best," he said quietly. Jean paused, studying him with that look she got when she was deciding whether to push an issue. Her hand rested on her belly, the belly that carried someone else's child. "You've been weird lately. Distant. Just tired. Work's been intense." The lie came easily. Harry had learned that engineers made good liars because they understood systems, patterns, the architecture of believable deception. He'd been designing load-bearing walls his whole career. Turned out he was pretty good at building emotional walls, too. "Well, try to wake up for this. It's important." Jean grabbed a bottle of water and disappeared into the bedroom, already scrolling through her phone. Harry opened the notebook again, staring at the list of values. Honesty, he sat at the top, underlined twice. He'd written it 6 months ago, full of conviction about the kind of father he wanted to be. The irony burned his chest like swallowed glass. He flipped back through earlier pages, stopping on one from 2 years ago. It was a list he'd made right after proposing, "Reasons I Love Jean." He read through it now with the detached interest of an archaeologist examining artifacts from a dead civilization. Her laugh when she's truly happy. The way she remembers small details. How she makes friends everywhere. Her ambition and drive. The future we'll build together. That last line hit differently now. The future they'd built was constructed on lies, and Harry had been the only one who didn't know he was working with faulty materials. 23 minutes later, Norma Thatcher arrived without knocking. She never knocked. Norma moved through the world as if every door was hers to open, every space hers to occupy. She wore a cream-colored cardigan and pearls, always pearls, and carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned early that appearance mattered more than sincerity. "Harry," she said, her smile sharp and practiced. So lovely to see the house looking presentable. He stood, returning her brittle handshake. Her fingers were cold, her grip weak. Everything about Norma was surface, pretty to look at, but lacking any real foundation. Norma, can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Oh, no, thank you. I won't be long. She set her purse on the table, on top of Harry's notebook, and glanced around the living room he'd renovated with his own hands. New drywall, refinished hardwood, custom built-ins for Jean's books. 6 months of weekends and late nights. You've done adequate work on the space, though I still think hiring professionals would have been more appropriate. Adequate. Harry had reinforced the foundation, rewired the electrical, replumbed the bathroom, and rebuilt the back deck from scratch. But to Norma, anything he did would only ever be adequate. Jean's just changing, Harry said, ignoring the jab. She'll be out in a minute. Norma nodded, but her attention wasn't on the bedroom door. She was studying Harry with the intensity of someone evaluating structural weakness. Her smile softened into something almost pitying, like she was about to tell a child their pet had died. Harry, she said, lowering her voice, I've been meaning to have a private word with you. Something cold settled in Harry's stomach. He'd spent enough time reading load calculations to recognize when pressure was about to shift. About what? About Jean. About the baby. About what's best for this family. Norma stepped closer, and Harry caught the scent of her perfume. Expensive, floral, cloying. The kind of smell that announced itself before she entered a room. Harry waited. He'd learned in engineering that sometimes the best response to stress was stillness. Let the forces reveal themselves. Don't react until you understand the full load distribution. The greatest gift you could give this family, Norma continued, her smile never wavering, her voice honey-sweet and venomous, would be to disappear from it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, rain drummed against the windows in steady rhythm. Somewhere in the house, Jean was humming, happy, oblivious, comfortable in her deception. The sound felt obscene now. Harry's hands didn't shake. His voice didn't rise. Years of managing construction sites, of dealing with contractors and deadlines and the constant threat of collapse, had taught him how to hold pressure without breaking. Is that right? He said quietly. Everyone knows you're holding her back. Norma's tone was gentle, maternal, as if she were offering advice on gardening or meal planning. Jean deserves better. She always has. This baby deserves better. You're a nice man, Harry, but nice isn't enough. Jean needs someone with ambition. Someone who can provide the life she was meant to have. The life she was meant to have. As if Jean were some delicate princess trapped in a tower, and Harry was the dragon keeping her there. Never mind that he'd renovated this entire house. Never mind that he made good money as a structural engineer. Never mind that he'd been loyal, faithful, present for 7 years while Jean had been planning his replacement. You're a structural engineer, Norma continued, warming to her subject. That's fine, respectable even, but Jean has potential for so much more. She could be living in Portland or Seattle. She could be socializing with successful people, making connections. Instead, she's stuck here in this little town, in this little house with... She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. With you. Harry felt something shift inside him. Not anger. Anger was hot and reactive and sloppy. This was something colder, more precise. The same feeling he got when he looked at a building's blueprints and spotted the flaw that would cause eventual collapse. The clarity of seeing exactly how something would fail and exactly how to engineer that failure. The baby deserves a father who can give her opportunities, Norma pressed. Don't you want what's best for your daughter? My daughter. Harry almost laughed. The cruelty of it. Norma using his love for a child that wasn't his to convince him to leave. She didn't know about the paternity test yet. Didn't know that Harry had already discovered the truth. She thought she was being clever, manipulative, successfully maneuvering him out of the picture. She had no idea she was building the scaffolding for her own destruction. Harry gave a small nod, the kind that made Norma's smile widen with satisfaction. She thought she'd won. Thought he was defeated, compliant, ready to disappear like a problem solved with a polite conversation and some gentle manipulation. I'll think about what you said, Harry told her, his voice steady. That's all I ask. Norma patted his arm like he was a child who'd finally understood a simple lesson. Her hand lingered a moment too long, proprietary and dismissive. "You're a good man, Harry, but good isn't always enough. Sometimes love means letting go." Jean emerged from the bedroom then, cutting off whatever Harry might have said next. She'd changed into a soft sweater and maternity jeans, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked comfortable, domestic, like someone settling into a life she deserved. Mother and daughter disappeared into animated conversation about guest lists and decorations and cake flavors, their voices bright with excitement for a celebration that felt, to Harry, like a funeral for everything he believed in. He stood there for another minute, listening to them plan. Jean wanted the decorations in peach and gold. Norma insisted on inviting her entire social circle. They debated between chocolate and vanilla cake like it was a matter of international importance, their voices overlapping in that way women in the same family often talked, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at private jokes, existing in a bubble that explicitly excluded him. Harry picked up his notebook from beneath Norma's purse and walked to his workshop in the garage. The space smelled like sawdust and motor oil, familiar and honest. His tools hung on pegboards he'd installed himself, organized by size and function. Everything in its place. Everything serving a clear purpose. Unlike the house behind him, where nothing was what it seemed. He sat on his workbench, the metal cold through his jeans, and stared at nothing while his mind worked through calculations. Not engineering calculations. Those were simple. These were the calculations of consequence, of action and reaction, of how to bring down a structure so completely that no one could rebuild from the rubble. Inside the house, Jean and Norma laughed about something. The sound carried through the walls, muffled but present. Happy, careless. Harry opened his notebook and began to write. That evening, after Norma left and Jean retreated to the shower, Harry sat on the edge of their bed in the growing darkness. The house was quiet except for running water and Jean's off-key singing. She always sang in the shower, usually pop songs from when they were dating, songs that had played in his truck while they drove to the coast for weekend trips. She was singing one of those songs now. Harry used to find it endearing. Tonight it made his skin crawl. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. Harry stared at it for a long moment. He'd never been the kind of husband who checked phones, who invaded privacy, who let jealousy or suspicion poison trust. In 7 years of marriage, he'd never once looked through Jean's messages. He trusted her completely, the way you trust a bridge not to collapse beneath you, the way you trust that the engineer who designed it knew what they were doing. But Norma's words echoed in his mind. Everyone knows you're holding her back, and something about the certainty in her voice made his hand move before his brain could stop it. The message preview glowed in the dim room. TK, can't wait to hold our baby. She kicked again today. Our baby. Harry's breathing stayed steady, mechanical. He unlocked the phone. Jean's passcode was their anniversary, because of course it was, and scrolled through messages that dismantled 7 years of marriage and the time it took water to run cold. The texts went back months. The first ones were innocent enough, old friends reconnecting, casual conversation about mutual acquaintances. Then they shifted, became flirtatious, then explicit, then planning. I can't stand being around him anymore, Jean had written 3 months ago. He's so predictable, so boring, always working on some project, always focused on the future instead of living in the moment. You deserve better, TK had replied. You deserve someone who makes you feel alive. You make me feel alive. Harry scrolled further, his thumb moving mechanically across the screen. Photos. Jean had sent photos. Ultrasound images she'd told Harry were just for us. Pictures she'd promised were sacred documentation of their journey into parenthood. She'd sent them to TK with captions like "Our little miracle" and "Can't wait to start our family." Their family. There were logistics too. Plans for after the baby came. Discussions about how to handle the Harry problem. Jean had suggested waiting until after the birth, letting him bond with the baby, then slowly transitioning to the truth. TK had agreed. Let Harry help with the hard newborn months, then phase him out once the baby was sleeping through the night. Use him, then discard him. Harry found the message where Jean told TK about the baby shower. Mom's going over to talk to Harry today. She's going to suggest he leave. I think he might actually do it. He's been so checked out lately anyway. Good, TK had written back. Makes things easier for us. I almost feel bad, Jean had replied. He's not a bad guy, just wrong for me. You can't help who you love, TK had responded. And you love me. I do, more than I ever loved him. Harry set the phone back exactly where it had been, screen down, positioned at the same angle. In the bathroom, Jean was still singing. The water shut off. She'd be out in 5 minutes, hair wrapped in a towel, smelling like lavender soap, ready to curl up next to him and scroll through baby name websites like they were building something together. Like they were partners. Like she hadn't spent months planning his disposal while he built a crib with his own hands. Harry stood and walked to his workshop in the garage. He pulled up a website on his phone and ordered a paternity test kit with overnight shipping. The cost was $240. Harry paid without hesitation. Some investments were worth every penny. Then he sat on his workbench, surrounded by tools he'd accumulated over 15 years. Saws and levels and measuring tapes, instruments of precision and truth, and stared at nothing. He already knew what the test would show, but he needed proof. Not for himself, for everyone else. 3 days later, the results came back exactly as expected. 0% probability of paternity. Harry read the report twice, sitting in his truck in the parking lot of the testing facility. The numbers were clear, clinical, final. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. The daughter he'd imagined, the one he'd written hiking plans for, the one he'd built a crib for, the one he'd read parenting books to prepare for, belonged to someone else entirely. The technician who'd processed his sample had been professional and detached, treating the test like any other medical procedure. She'd handed him the envelope without ceremony, wished him a good day, and moved on to the next client. She had no idea she'd just confirmed the end of someone's world. Harry sat in the truck for 20 minutes, engine off, rain tapping against the windshield. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't punch the steering wheel or call Jean or do any of the things a person was supposed to do when their entire life revealed itself to be fiction. Instead, he thought about load-bearing walls. In structural engineering, when a building needed to be demolished, you didn't just knock it down randomly. You studied the structure, identified the critical supports, calculated exactly which elements, if removed, would cause the entire thing to collapse in on itself. Then you placed charges at precise points and triggered them simultaneously. Controlled demolition. That's what this needed to be. Harry started the truck and drove to the office of Walter Brennan, the man who'd sold him the house 2 years ago. Walter was Old Willow Creek, 4th generation, owned half the commercial property downtown, did business with handshakes and his word. When Harry had bought the house, Walter had insisted on an unusual clause. If Harry decided to sell within 2 years, Walter would buy it back at 20% above purchase price. It's a family home, Walter had explained at closing, his weathered hands smoothing the contract. My grandmother was born in that house. Raised 7 kids there. Means something to me. Rather see it go to someone who'll love it. And if you don't, I want first right to try again. Harry had thought it strange, but harmless. Now he understood it was Providence. Walter's office sat above the hardware store on Main Street, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The space was cluttered with filing cabinets and old photographs of Willow Creek from decades past, black and white images of the town when it was barely more than a logging camp. Harry, Walter said when Harry walked in that afternoon. Good to see you. How's the renovation coming? Finished, Harry said. That's why I'm here. I want to exercise the buyback clause. Walter's eyebrows rose, his expression shifting from friendly to concerned in an instant. He was 70-something, with the kind of face that had seen enough of life not to ask stupid questions. You're selling? But the baby. Not my baby, Harry said simply. And I need to move quickly. Can you close in a week? Understanding dawned on Walter's weathered face like sunrise, slow, then sudden, then complete. His jaw tightened. In a town like Willow Creek, you didn't need to explain everything. People understood betrayal in all its forms. Jean, Walter asked, his voice careful. Jean. Walter was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I can close in 3 days if you need it. Cash. No inspection needed. I trust your work. Hell, I've seen what you did to that place. It's worth twice what I'm paying. He paused, studying Harry with something like respect. When do you want to leave? Harry thought about the baby shower, scheduled for Saturday. Today was Wednesday. Saturday morning, he said. Early. Before 9. Walter nodded slowly, his fingers drumming on the desk. I'll have everything ready Friday. You'll have your money before noon. And Harry, he leaned forward. Whatever you're planning, make it count. I will, Harry said. Good. Walter extended his hand across the desk. His grip was firm, solid, the handshake of someone who kept his word. I'm sorry, son. You deserve better. Don't be sorry, Harry said. I'm not disappearing. I'm just taking everything with me when I go. Something like a smile crossed Walter's face. That's the spirit. That night, Harry worked in his garage while Jean slept. The printer hummed steadily, spitting out page after page of evidence. 42 copies of the paternity test results on clean white paper. 42 sets of selected text messages. The ones where Jean and TK discussed the pregnancy, made plans for their future, complained about Harry's suspicious questions. He included photos Jean had sent, ultrasound images she'd texted to TK with hearts and promises of the family they'd build together. Finally, he wrote a letter. He drafted it 3 times, refining the language until it was perfect. Short, clear, devastating in its simplicity. You told me to disappear. So I did. Harry. He attached a copy of the divorce papers his lawyer had prepared that afternoon. Thomas Reed had been grimly efficient, drawing up documents that would protect Harry's interests and maximize Jean's consequences. The man had seen too many of these cases not to know exactly how to structure them for maximum impact. Each envelope got the complete package. Test results first, then messages, then photos, then the letter, finally the legal filing. Harry worked methodically, checking each packet for completeness, making sure nothing was missing and nothing was redundant. He wanted the evidence to speak for itself. Clear, undeniable, requiring no explanation. The printer ran for 2 hours straight while he assembled the packets. The garage smelled like warm toner and paper. Outside, an owl called from somewhere in the trees, its voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. Harry wondered if any of the neighbors were awake, if anyone would notice the light in his garage at 2 in the morning, if they'd wonder what he was doing. Probably not. He'd always been the quiet one, the reliable one, the guy who kept to himself and never caused problems. That was about to change. He labeled a box "Party Favors" in neat handwriting and loaded the envelopes inside, stacking them carefully so they wouldn't bend or crease. Then he placed the box in his truck, covered it with a tarp, and stood in his driveway for a moment, breathing cold night air. The house behind him was dark except for the porch light he'd installed last spring. Jean had picked the fixture. She'd wanted something with character, which meant expensive and ornamental. Harry had installed it without complaint, spending 3 hours rewiring the junction box to support the weight. He'd done that kind of thing 100 times. Fixed whatever she wanted fixed, built whatever she wanted built, accommodated every preference and request, because that's what you did when you loved someone. When you thought they loved you back. Harry went back inside, locked the garage, and climbed into bed beside Jean. She stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, then rolled over and continued sleeping. Her hair spilled across the pillow, dark and tangled, familiar in a way that made his chest ache despite everything. He'd loved her, actually loved her, would have given her anything, built her anything, been anything she needed. But she'd wanted someone else. And now everyone would know exactly what kind of person she really was. Harry lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling he'd repaired himself, planning every detail of Saturday morning. The moving truck was reserved for 7. Walter would transfer the money Friday. Harry had already opened a new bank account Jean didn't know about, had already moved his important documents to a safety deposit box across town. His camping gear, tools, books, everything that mattered was packed and ready in plastic bin stacked in the storage unit he'd rented last week. He'd learned from engineering that successful demolition required preparation, precision, and perfect timing. Saturday would be perfect. The Willow Creek Community Center sat on a hill overlooking the lake, surrounded by Douglas firs that swayed gently in the morning breeze. The building was rustic, exposed beams, wide windows overlooking the water, a stone fireplace that hadn't been lit since last winter. It was exactly the kind of picturesque venue Jean had always dreamed about for important occasions. Harry arrived at 9:30, 90 minutes before the shower officially started. His truck held the box of envelopes and very little else. Everything he cared about, tools, camping gear, books, his grandfather's fishing rod, the leather notebook, was already loaded in a U-Haul parked behind his lawyer's office downtown. He'd spent yesterday morning packing methodically, each item wrapped and secured, labeled and inventoried like he was preparing for a construction project. The center's coordinator, a cheerful woman named Linda, smiled when he walked in carrying the box. She was 50-ish, round-faced, the kind of person who volunteered for every community event and knew everyone's business. "You must be Harry. Jean said you'd be early with the favors. Aren't you sweet? Helping set up." "Happy to," Harry said, returning her smile with practiced ease. Engineers learned early how to be pleasant with clients, how to project competence and calm even when projects were falling apart behind the scenes. The room was already decorated. Peach and gold balloons clustered in corners, tied to weights shaped like baby bottles. A long table held space for gifts, another for food. Streamers hung from the beams. A banner stretched across the back wall in elegant script. "Welcome, Baby Calder." The name felt like a punch every time Harry saw it. Baby Calder. Except she wasn't a Calder at all. She was a Keller, TK's daughter. But no one except Harry, Jean, and TK knew that yet. In about 2 hours, everyone would know. "Where would you like the favors?" Harry asked Linda. "Oh, just place one at each seat. Aren't they cute in those envelopes?" "Did Jean make them?" "I put them together," Harry said truthfully. "Wanted them to be special." "Well, that's just lovely. She's lucky to have such a thoughtful husband." Harry's smile didn't falter. "That's kind of you to say." He moved around the room systematically, placing one envelope at each of the 42 chairs arranged around tables covered in peach tablecloths. Linda chatted pleasantly about the weather, about what a lovely couple he and Jean made, about how lucky that baby would be to have such devoted parents. "First baby?" Linda asked, adjusting a centerpiece. "Yes," Harry said, setting an envelope at table 4. "Oh, how exciting. And terrifying, I bet. My first was 32 years ago, and I still remember being absolutely petrified. But you figured out. Everyone does. And Jean seems like a natural." "She'll be great," Harry agreed, though what he really meant was that Jean was naturally good at pretending, at performing whatever role the situation required. She'd performed the role of loving wife for 7 years. She'd probably be equally convincing as a doting mother. By 10:15, the envelopes were distributed. Harry helped Linda arrange chairs, moved a table to better accommodate the gift display, and generally made himself useful. He was good at being useful. It was one of the things Jean used to say she loved about him, how he just took care of things quietly and efficiently without needing praise or recognition. Turned out that quality made you easy to betray, easy to take for granted, easy to plan around like a piece of furniture that would just stay where you put it. "You're a gem," Linda said, patting his arm. "Jean's lucky to have you." "That's what everyone keeps saying," Harry replied, and excused himself to sit in his truck where he could watch guests arrive without being drawn into early conversations. The first car pulled up at 10:40. Barbara Chun, one of Jean's college friends, stepped out carrying a gift bag stuffed with pink tissue paper. Then Patricia Williams from the book club, struggling with an enormous wrapped box. Then a steady stream as 11 o'clock approached. Jean's sorority sisters, neighbors from their street, women from her volunteer work at the library, Norma's wealthy acquaintances in their pressed slacks and expensive handbags. They arrived carrying gifts wrapped in pastels, their faces bright with anticipation for an afternoon of celebration, of cooing over tiny clothes and speculating about the baby's features, of playing silly games and eating cake and congratulating themselves for being part of this blessed occasion. Harry watched them enter the building, watched Linda greet them with enthusiasm, watched them notice the envelopes on their seats and smile. thinking they were cards or games or some clever baby shower tradition Jean had found on Pinterest. At 10:55, Norma's Mercedes pulled into the lot. She emerged wearing pale blue and those ever-present pearls, moving with the rigid precision of someone who'd spent 70 years controlling every aspect of how she was perceived. Two of her friends accompanied her, Judith something and Margaret something else, both wealthy widows who spent their time at charity luncheons and garden club meetings, judging everyone and finding them wanting. They swept into the building like visiting royalty, their voices carrying across the parking lot, loud enough to ensure everyone knew they'd arrived, soft enough to maintain the illusion of class. At 11 sharp, Harry got out of his truck and walked to the entrance. He wore a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. Nothing fancy, but he'd shaved carefully and combed his hair. He wanted to look composed, in control, not like a man whose world had imploded, but like a man who'd engineered its destruction. The room was full now, maybe 38 people with more still arriving. Conversations hummed pleasantly. Someone laughed at a joke. A woman cooed over a tiny pair of shoes displayed on the gift table. The scene was warm, communal, exactly what Jean had envisioned for months. Norma stood near the gift table, holding court with several older women. She wore pale blue and those ever-present pearls, her posture rigid with self-importance. When she saw Harry, her smile sharpened into something predatory and dismissive. "Harry," she said, her tone suggesting his presence was both expected and regrettable. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," Harry replied evenly. Something in his voice made her blink, a flicker of uncertainty quickly buried beneath her practiced composure. But the moment passed. She turned back to her conversation, already forgetting him. Harry had always been easy to forget, dependable, quiet, there when needed but never demanding attention. Today would be different. He moved through the room, accepting greetings, shaking hands, thanking people for coming. Barbara Chun hugged him, saying something about how excited she was. Patricia Williams asked if he was nervous about fatherhood. Laughing when he said terrified seemed like the appropriate response. Everyone was friendly, warm, treating him like the proud father-to-be he was supposed to be. He was good at this, at small talk, at being pleasant without revealing anything real. Most of the guests knew him as Jean's steady husband, the engineer who'd renovated that beautiful house, the guy who helped neighbors with roof repairs and always brought good beer to barbecues. They had no idea what was coming. At 11:20, Jean arrived. She swept into the room wearing a flowing blue dress that accentuated her pregnancy, her hair styled perfectly, her smile dazzling. Women rushed to embrace her. Compliments flew. She looked radiant, glowing, absolutely beautiful. Jean laughed and accepted attention with practiced grace. This was her element, being celebrated, being the center of warmth and admiration. She spotted Harry across the room and made her way to him, weaving through well-wishers with ease. When she reached him, she kissed his cheek, her lips warm and familiar against his skin. The gesture felt obscene now, intimate and false in equal measure. "Thank you for being here," she whispered, quiet enough that only he could hear. "I know you don't love these things." "Of course," Harry said, and meant it. He wouldn't have missed this for anything. Jean searched his face for a moment, as if trying to read something in his expression. But Harry had spent 3 days practicing this. The neutral smile, the calm demeanor, the appearance of a supportive husband dutifully attending his wife's celebration. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. She squeezed his hand and turned back to her guests. Jean mingled while Harry stayed at the periphery. He noticed her glance at the envelopes several times, her expression curious but not concerned. She probably thought they were baby shower cards, maybe advice for new parents, or predictions about the baby's future, something cute and sentimental that guest had prepared. She had no idea each envelope contained the documentation of her betrayal. At 11:45, Linda called everyone to sit. The crowd settled into chairs, conversations continuing at lower volumes. Harry took a seat near the back, far enough from Jean to watch everything unfold, close enough to hear every word. He had a clear view of the head table where Jean would sit with Norma and her closest friends. Lunch was served, sandwiches and salads from the deli downtown, iced tea and lemonade in pitchers decorated with lemon slices. Casual conversation continued as people ate. Jean sat at the head table, glowing with happiness, occasionally touching her belly with that unconscious maternal gesture Harry had found so beautiful before he knew the truth. She was a good performer. He'd give her that. The role of expectant mother suited her. All soft smiles and gentle vulnerability, accepting congratulations with humble gratitude. If he hadn't seen the text messages, if he didn't know about TK, Harry might have believed in this performance too. But he did know, and soon everyone else would. At 12:30, Jean stood to give her thank you speech. The room quieted immediately. Someone clinked a glass, that old tradition to signal attention. Jean's smile was radiant as she looked around at all the faces gathered to celebrate her, to welcome her child, to support her journey into motherhood. She paused, letting the moment build, and Harry had to admire the technique. She knew how to work a room. "Thank you all so much for being here," she began, her voice warm and steady, pitched perfectly to reach every corner without seeming to project. "It means everything to have this community around us. Family is everything, right? And not just blood family, but the family we choose, friends who become sisters, neighbors who become lifelong connections." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several women were already dabbing at their eyes, primed for emotion. Harry watched her talk about family while carrying another man's child, about community while betraying her marriage, about love while planning his disposal with the same casual efficiency someone might use planning a vacation. "This baby," Jean continued, one hand resting on her belly in that practiced maternal gesture, "is going to be so lucky. Growing up in Willow Creek, surrounded by people who care, who show up, who believe in supporting each other through life's journey. That's what makes a childhood magical. Not just parents, but this entire network of love." More dabbing of eyes. Norma beamed with pride from her seat, clearly approving of her daughter's performance. This was the Jean that Norma had raised, polished, charming, capable of saying exactly what people wanted to hear. "And I want to especially thank my husband," Jean said, turning toward Harry. Her eyes found his across the room, and for a moment he saw something flicker there, uncertainty, maybe, or the faintest recognition that something was different about him today. But it passed quickly, buried beneath her performance. "For being patient with my mood swings, for painting the nursery 3 times until I got the color right, for being the kind of man I want our daughter to look up to." The room made appreciative sounds. A few people applauded. Barbara Chun actually wiped away a tear. Harry's expression remained neutral, pleasant, impossible to read. Inside, he was calculating timing, watching the clock, waiting for the perfect moment. "So, thank you," Jean finished, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "Thank you for being here, for caring, for celebrating this new life with us. It means more than words can say." Applause filled the room. Women stood to hug Jean, forming a line of well-wishers. The mood was tender, communal, perfect. This was the climax of Jean's performance. The moment where she received the validation and attention she'd craved, where she could bask in the admiration of people who thought she was good and honest and deserving of celebration. Harry stood and walked to the front of the room. Jean saw him coming and smiled, assuming he was joining her for a joint thank you, maybe a sweet word about their partnership. Linda, still standing near the microphone, handed it to him without question. Why wouldn't she? He was the husband, the father-to-be, here to add his voice to the celebration. "Thanks, everyone," Harry said into the microphone, his voice calm and clear. The room quieted immediately, all eyes turning toward him. "Before we cut the cake, I'd like everyone to open the envelopes on your seats." A confused rustle spread through the room. People glanced at each other, uncertain. Jean's smile wavered, just slightly, just enough that Harry noticed. Her hand moved toward the envelope at her place setting, then stopped. "What?" she started. "Please," Harry said, still calm. His voice carried no emotion, no anger, nothing but simple instruction. "Open them now." The first envelope tore open near table 3, then another at table 1. Then suddenly the room filled with the sound of paper rustling, of pages turning, of people reading in growing silence. The first gasp came from Barbara Chun. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening as she read. Then Patricia Williams made a choking sound. Then someone else inhaled sharply. Harry watched the reactions ripple outward like shock waves from explosion. Watched faces transform from confusion to understanding to horror. Watched as 42 people read the truth simultaneously. Clinical paternity results that couldn't be disputed, printed messages that couldn't be denied, a simple letter that made everything clear. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "This can't be real." Someone else breathed. 0%. Another voice, louder now, shocked enough to break the silence. Norma's elegant composure shattered first. Her face drained of color as she stared at the papers in her trembling hands, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. The pearls at her throat suddenly looked like shackles, ridiculous and pretentious against her collapsing dignity. Jean snatched an envelope from Melissa, her closest friend, her maid of honor from their wedding 7 years ago. Her hand shook as she pulled out the contents, nearly tearing the pages. Harry watched her eyes scan the paternity test first, saw the exact moment comprehension hit. Her face went white, her breath caught in a gasp, her whole body seemed to fold inward like a building losing structural support. "Harry," she said, her voice breaking on his name. "Wait, this is wrong." "Norma told me to disappear," Harry said into the microphone, his voice steady and emotionless. Not angry, not hurt, just stating facts. "This is me granting her wish." The room was utterly silent except for Jean's ragged breathing and the rustle of papers as people reread the evidence, trying to process what they were seeing. 42 pairs of eyes moved between Harry, Jean, Norma, and the damning documentation in their hands. "You can't." Jean tried again, tears starting to stream down her face. Her makeup was running, black streaks of mascara cutting through her carefully applied foundation. "This is a mistake. We can talk about this." 0% probability of paternity, Harry said quietly, clearly, ensuring everyone heard. "No mistake. No margin of error. That's what the test says. That's what the messages confirm. That's what you've been hiding for 7 months. Please," Jean begged, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Not like this. Not here. We can." "Exactly like this," Harry said. Someone's phone rose, recording. Then another. Then several more. The age of social media meant this moment would live forever, copied and shared and dissected by strangers who didn't know Jean or Harry, but would judge them anyway. The video would be online within an hour, viewed by thousands by tomorrow, turned into memes and commentary and cautionary tales. Jean's sobs were starting now, her careful composure collapsing completely. "Please," she begged again, reaching toward him across the distance between them. "Harry, please, I can't explain." "You already did," Harry said, his voice still steady. "In those messages. To TK, remember? The ones where you discussed our baby. Except she's not our baby. The ones where you called me boring and predictable. The ones where you planned how to handle the Harry problem after the birth." Audible gasps rippled through the room. Norma was openly crying now, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. Her wealthy friends had moved away from her slightly, as if betrayal might be contagious. "This isn't real," Jean sobbed. "Someone's lying. Someone set this up." "DNA doesn't lie," Barbara Chin said from table 3, her voice cold. She was still holding the papers, staring at Jean like she'd never seen her before. "These are clinical lab results, Jean. This is real. And these messages," Patricia Williams added, her voice shaking with anger. "These are your words. Your photos. You sent ultrasound pictures to another man, while Harry was building a crib." The room erupted then. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Women who'd come to celebrate were now confronting Jean with the evidence in their hands, their tones ranging from shocked to furious to heartbroken. Someone shouted something about betrayal. Someone else demanded to know how Jean could do this to such a good man. Jean's response was incoherent, drowning in her own sobs and the wave of condemnation from people who'd gathered to celebrate her. She tried to speak several times, but couldn't form words, could only shake her head and cry while her mother wept beside her. Harry handed the microphone back to Linda, whose face had gone pale with shock, whose hands trembled as she took it. Then he walked toward the door. "Wait!" Jean called after him, her voice breaking. "Harry, please don't." But he was already moving, already leaving, already walking away from the woman who'd asked him to disappear and was now begging him to stay. Behind him, chaos continued to erupt. Norma's voice rose above the others, high and desperate and defensive, trying to argue that there must be some explanation, some mistake, even though the evidence was undeniable. Someone shouted at her that she should be ashamed. Someone else said they'd always known she was a manipulative woman. Jean's pleas became louder, more desperate, but Harry didn't turn around. He pushed through the door and stepped into clean air and sunshine. The parking lot was peaceful. Birds sang in the Douglas firs. The lake sparkled in the distance, oblivious to human drama. Harry walked to his truck at a normal pace, his heart rate barely elevated, his hands steady on the keys. Behind him, through the walls of the community center, he could hear shouting, crying, the sound of a celebration turned nightmare. Linda's voice came over the microphone, trying to restore order, asking people to please calm down. It wouldn't work. You couldn't put this kind of chaos back in a box. Harry started his truck and drove away slowly, carefully, obeying every traffic law. As he turned onto the main road, he glanced in the rearview mirror once, just once, and saw people spilling out of the community center, their phones raised, still recording, still processing, still trying to understand what they just witnessed. He didn't look back again. The house looked different when Harry pulled into the driveway for the last time. Emptier, somehow, even from the outside. Like it already knew he was leaving. Like the structure itself understood its purpose had ended. The U-Haul truck sat waiting at the curb, parked exactly where the rental company had left it at 7 that morning. Harry had packed it yesterday, everything that mattered, everything that was his. The heavy furniture could stay. Jean could have the couch they'd bought together, the TV he'd mounted on the wall, the dining table he'd built with his own hands. None of it mattered anymore. They were just objects now, stripped of meaning, no longer connected to anything resembling a home. He unlocked the front door one final time and walked through rooms he'd renovated board by board. The living room where he'd replaced all the drywall after discovering water damage. The kitchen where he'd installed new cabinets and countertops, spending 2 full weekends on his knees getting the tile perfectly level. The bedroom where he'd refinished the hardwood floors, the chemical smell of the finish lingering for days. 6 months of work, hundreds of hours, thousands of dollars in materials, all to create a home for a family that was never real. His phone buzzed. Jean calling. Then again, immediately, she was panicking now, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. Then a text appeared. "Please come back. We can talk about this. I can explain everything. It's not what you think." Harry blocked her number without reading further. There was nothing to explain, nothing to discuss. The paternity test and her own messages had said everything that needed saying. His phone buzzed again 30 seconds later. Norma this time. He blocked her too. He walked through each room one final time, not sentimentally, but practically, checking that he'd left nothing valuable, nothing personal, nothing that mattered. The living room was hollow without his books. The kitchen felt sterile without his coffee maker. Even the sounds were different. His footsteps echoed in ways they hadn't before, the house seeming to amplify his departure. The nursery door was closed. He opened it slowly, reluctantly. The room still smelled like fresh paint. That third color Jean had insisted on, a soft sage green that had taken him an entire weekend to apply properly. The crib he'd built stood against the far wall, solid and well-constructed, ready for a baby that would never be his. He'd spent 40 hours on that crib, cut each piece precisely, sanded everything smooth, applied 3 coats of non-toxic finish. He'd researched safety standards, watched YouTube videos about proper slat spacing, measured and remeasured every dimension to ensure it met modern safety codes. He built it with love, with anticipation, with the belief that his daughter would sleep safely in something her father had made with his own hands. Someone else's daughter. Harry looked at the crib for a long moment, then closed the door and walked away. Let Jean explain it to TK. Let them figure out what to do with a piece of furniture built by the man they betrayed. Maybe they'd keep it. Maybe they'd throw it away. It didn't matter anymore. In the garage, he did one final sweep for any remaining tools. Most were already in the U-Haul, but he found a few items he'd missed: a box of drill bits, a leather work belt his father had given him, a level that had belonged to his grandfather. He loaded them into his truck with care, these relics of his past that connected him to men who'd actually kept their promises. He grabbed the leather notebook from the kitchen table where he'd left it that morning. The pages felt heavier now, weighted with plans that would never happen, futures that would never exist. He opened to the page titled Values to Teach and stared at the list he'd written so carefully. Honesty, resilience, respect, integrity, loyalty. He wanted to raise a daughter who embodied these things. Instead, he'd been married to someone who embodied none of them. Harry closed the notebook and placed it in his truck. Then he walked through the house one final time, turned off all the lights, and locked the front door behind him. The keys went into an envelope Walter Brennan had provided, thick manila, pre-addressed to Walter's office. Inside were simple instructions Harry had written. House is empty and clean. All repairs completed. Title transfer documentation attached. Thank you for honoring our agreement. The house sale had closed Friday morning, exactly as promised. The money, a substantial sum from the original purchase price plus Walter's 20% buyback premium, was already transferred to Harry's new account at a bank in Bend. Clean, legal, final. Walter had texted this morning, money's in. Good luck, son. You earned this. Harry drove to the post office and dropped the keys in Walter's designated mailbox. Then he sat in his truck for a moment, engine idling, looking at the building he'd spent 2 years improving. From the outside, it looked perfect. New roof, fresh paint, landscaped yard. You couldn't see the structural repairs he'd made, the updated electrical, the new plumbing. You couldn't see all the invisible work that had transformed a rundown house into something worth having. Just like you couldn't see all the invisible work he'd done in his marriage, all the compromises and patience and dedication that Jean had taken for granted while planning his replacement. He put the truck in gear and drove across town to his lawyer's office. Thomas Reed's building was downtown, a restored Victorian with his practice on the second floor. Thomas was 60-something, white-haired, and had practiced family law in Oregon for 35 years. He'd seen everything: bitter divorces, custody battles, financial warfare between people who'd once promised to love each other forever. When Harry had walked into his office 10 days ago with the paternity results and Jean's text messages, Thomas had listened to the whole story without interrupting, then simply nodded and said, "Let's make sure you're protected." Now Thomas sat behind his desk with a thin smile that suggested he'd already heard about the baby shower. "I take it everything went according to plan?" "More or less." Harry sat in the leather chair across from Thomas, suddenly feeling the weight of the morning. Adrenaline was fading now, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "I heard it was quite a scene." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Cheryl at the post office saw the videos online. Said half the town is talking about nothing else." Videos. Plural. At least 5 different people posted footage. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed Harry. The screen displayed a Facebook post with a video thumbnail. Harry standing at the microphone, Jean's face frozen in mid-sob. The caption read, "OMG, baby shower at Willow Creek turned into divorce announcement." Full video inside. "Already has 40,000 views," Thomas said. "People are sharing it like wildfire. Comments are overwhelmingly on your side, for what that's worth." Harry didn't know if it was worth anything. He hadn't done this for public approval. He'd done it because Norma had told him to disappear, and he needed her to understand that disappearing didn't mean vanishing quietly. It meant taking everything with him and making sure they felt the absence. "Good," Harry said simply. Thomas set his phone aside, his expression turning more serious. "We need to discuss the financial protection agreement." Harry had almost forgotten about it. a document Jean had begged him to sign 18 months ago, back when Norma was pushing for financial transparency in the marriage. Norma had insisted on it, claiming she needed assurance that Harry was financially stable before they invested more deeply in family planning. The agreement had seemed odd at the time. Why would they need a legal document when they were already married? But Jean had been tearful and insistent. She'd framed it as helping her stand up to her mother, proving that Harry was committed and responsible. So he'd signed, barely reading the details because he trusted her completely. What Jean never knew, what Norma's arrogance had blinded her to, was what Thomas had quietly added to the standard language. The adultery clause, Thomas said now, pulling out several highlighted pages from a thick folder. Remember when you came in to sign and I insisted we add extra protections? You thought I was being paranoid. Harry did remember. Thomas had taken him aside, explained that prenups and financial agreements could cut both ways, and suggested adding ironclad language that would protect Harry if things ever went wrong. At the time, Harry had thought it unnecessary. He and Jean were solid, committed, building a future together. Now Thomas's paranoia looked like wisdom. Any infidelity during the marriage, Thomas read from the document, results in the unfaithful party owing the faithful party 50% of all jointly acquired equity plus reimbursement for documented financial contributions to shared assets. Harry nodded slowly. And the house, solely in your name, purchased before marriage with your money, renovated with your money, sold with your decision. The agreement Jean signed acknowledges this explicitly. She has no claim to it or its sale proceeds. Thomas's smile widened. But your documented financial contributions to shared marital life, I'm quoting the agreement here, include everything you spent on the pregnancy, nursery setup, baby-related purchases, and even the baby shower itself. How much? Thomas slid a detailed spreadsheet across the desk. The numbers were itemized precisely. Every baby-related purchase Harry had made over 7 months, with receipts and credit card statements attached. Crib materials and construction supplies. Prenatal vitamins Jean had asked him to buy. Maternity clothes she'd charged to their joint account. Doctor visits he'd paid for. The baby shower venue rental, food decorations. It went on for 3 pages. By my calculation, Thomas said, roughly $147,000. That includes the theoretical equity she would have claimed in a standard divorce, plus every documented expense with proof of payment. Harry stared at the number. It represented every time he'd pulled out his wallet for this pregnancy, every purchase made in good faith for what he thought was his daughter, every investment in a future that was built on lies. She can't afford this, Harry said quietly. No, Thomas agreed, his tone matter of fact. She absolutely cannot. Her salary as a part-time librarian is $32,000 a year. After taxes and basic living expenses, she has almost nothing left, which means one of 2 things happens. Thomas held up one finger. Option 1. She agrees to a court-mandated payment plan that will follow her for the next decade. I'm thinking monthly installments of approximately $1,200 for 8 years. Every single month, she'll be reminded of what she did. He held up a second finger. Option 2. She declares bankruptcy, which will destroy her credit, make it nearly impossible to rent a decent apartment or get a car loan, and permanently mark her financial history. Her mother's wealthy friends will be absolutely horrified. Harry thought about Norma, her pearls, her rigid posture, her obsession with appearances and status. Thought about her telling him to disappear because he wasn't good enough for her daughter. Thought about Jean texting another man while Harry built furniture by hand for a baby that wasn't his. Payment plan, Harry said. Monthly installments. I want it to last as long as possible. 8 years it is. Thomas made a note on his legal pad. I'll structure it so the payments are unchangeable. No modifications without court approval. No early payoff option without your consent. She'll be legally bound to send you $1,200 every single month until 2033. Perfect. The divorce itself will be finalized in 6 weeks, Thomas continued. Given the circumstances, documented paternity fraud, clear evidence of adultery, your obvious willingness to present evidence in court, Jean would be insane to fight it. Her lawyer will almost certainly advise immediate settlement. And if she does fight, Thomas's smile turned sharp. Then we go to court with the paternity test, the messages, 42 witnesses who saw her reaction, and approximately 5 viral videos showing her breakdown when confronted with evidence. We'll win. It'll be public record forever, and it'll cost her thousands more in legal fees she doesn't have. Thomas closed the folder with a decisive snap. Harry, I've been doing this a long time. Trust me when I say, you've already won. Everything else is just paperwork. She has no leverage, no defense, and no good options. In 6 weeks, you'll be legally free. In 8 years, she'll finally stop paying for what she did. But emotionally, she'll be paying for this the rest of her life. Harry stood, shook Thomas's hand across the desk. Thank you. My pleasure. Truly. Thomas walked him to the door. And Harry? What you did today took guts. A lot of men would have just confronted her privately, let her control the narrative, allowed her to play victim. You made sure everyone knew the truth. That matters. Harry nodded and left, walking down the creaky Victorian stairs and out into afternoon sunshine that felt warmer than it should have for early autumn in Oregon. His phone buzzed again as he reached his truck. A different number this time, one he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, then decided to answer. Might be someone from the shower trying to reach him, or maybe a friend offering support. Harry, a male voice, uncertain and rough. This is Trevor Keller. TK, the other man, the biological father. Harry's hand tightened on the phone so hard his knuckles went white. What do you want? Trevor's voice cracked slightly, like he was struggling to find words. I heard what happened at the shower. I need you to know I never meant for any of this to. Stop, Harry said quietly, his voice flat and cold as winter steel. I don't care what you meant. I don't care about your story or your regrets or whatever explanation you think I need to hear. But I just want you to understand. Understand what? That you slept with another man's wife? That you helped her plan my replacement? That you're the reason I spent 40 hours building a crib for a baby that was never mine? Harry's voice stayed level, controlled, but something in his tone made Trevor fall silent. I understand perfectly. You're a coward who went after a married woman because it was easier than finding someone available. Silence on the line. Harry could hear Trevor breathing, quick, shallow, the breath of someone who'd made a terrible mistake and was just now realizing the consequences. You're going to be a father, Harry continued. Congratulations. That baby deserves better than both of you, so I suggest you figure out how to be someone worth knowing. Step up. Be present. Don't be the kind of man who destroys families and then makes excuses about it. I will, Trevor said quietly. I promise. Your promises don't mean anything to me, Harry said, but make them mean something to that little girl. She didn't ask for any of this. I know. And Trevor, don't call me again. Ever. If I see your number, I'll block it. If I see you in public, I'll walk the other way. You don't get closure or forgiveness or whatever you're looking for. You get to live with what you did. We clear? Yeah, Trevor said, his voice barely audible. Clear. Harry hung up and immediately blocked the number. He sat in his truck for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the anger drain away. Getting mad now served no purpose. The system was in motion, legal, financial, social. Jean would pay monthly for 8 years. Norma would live with her shattered reputation. Trevor would raise a daughter while knowing he'd built his family on someone else's destruction. Harry had already won. Everything else was just watching the consequences play out. He drove to the storage unit he'd rented on the edge of town and spent 3 hours unloading the U-Haul systematically, organizing his belongings with the same precision he'd used packing them. Tools on one side, sorted by type and size. Camping gear on the other, ready for the hiking trips he'd planned with a daughter who would never exist. Boxes of books and clothes stacked neatly along the back wall. Everything he owned fit in a 10 by 10 space with room to spare. It was almost funny. 7 years of marriage, reduced to 100 square feet of carefully organized possessions. When he finished, the sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the sky orange and pink and purple in layers. Harry locked the storage unit, returned the U-Haul to the rental place, and drove his truck to the small motel where he'd reserved a room for the next 2 weeks. The Ponderosa Inn sat on the highway outside town, a single-story building with green doors and a flickering vacancy sign. His room was on the end, number 12, and it was exactly what he needed, clean and anonymous. Generic landscape art on the walls. A bed that wasn't his. A view of the parking lot. A place to exist without memory or context. He dropped his bag on the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day. His hands were steady, his breathing calm, but exhaustion pulled at him like gravity. He opened his leather notebook to a blank page and wrote, Day 1 house sold. Divorce filed. Financial settlement drafted. Storage unit secured. Temporary housing acquired. He paused, pen hovering over paper, considering what else to say. Then he added, Noma got what she wanted. I disappeared, but I took everything with me when I left. He closed the notebook and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His phone stayed blessedly silent. Everyone who mattered was blocked, and everyone else had gotten the message. Harry was alone for the first time in 7 years, truly alone, with no wife to consider or marriage to maintain or future to build toward. The relief was overwhelming. He slept that night better than he had in months, dreamless and deep. While across town, Jean faced the wreckage of her choices, and Norma tried desperately to control damage that was already beyond repair. 3 months later, Harry sat on the porch of a lakeside cabin outside Bend, 2 hours east of Willow Creek, and a lifetime away from everything that had happened. The cabin was small, 1 bedroom, efficiency kitchen, wood stove for heat, a porch overlooking water so clear you could see trout moving in the shallows. He'd signed a year-long lease with an option to buy, and already the place felt more like home than the house he'd renovated ever had. The lake stretched out before him, dark blue and still in the morning calm. Pines climbed the hills on the far shore, their tops disappearing into low clouds. A pair of eagles nested in a dead snag visible from his porch. He'd watched them raise 3 chicks over the summer, teaching them to fish, eventually pushing them from the nest to learn flight. Harry had started birdwatching, something he'd never had time for when he was busy building a life with Jean. Now, he kept a field guide on the coffee table, binoculars hanging by the door. He'd identified 43 species so far, marking each one in the back of his leather notebook. He worked remotely now, consulting on structural projects for firms across Oregon and Washington. The pay was good, actually better than his old salary, and the hours were flexible. Most importantly, no one here knew his story. His neighbors were seasonal, summer people who disappeared after Labor Day, leaving Harry in peaceful solitude through fall and winter. His phone buzzed against the arm of his chair. A notification from his bank. Payment received, $1,200. Harry opened the banking app and checked his balance. Jean's first installment had arrived, right on schedule, exactly as the court-ordered payment plan dictated. $1,200 transferred electronically on the 1st of the month. No note accompanied it. No plea for forgiveness. No explanation or apology or attempt to reconnect. Just money. Pure and simple. The only language Norma had ever really spoken, and now Jean was learning it fluently, $1,200 at a time, month after month for the next 8 years. Harry closed the app and opened his leather notebook. The pages were filling up with new content now. Hiking trails he'd actually completed with notes about difficulty and views. Bird species he'd identified with dates and locations. Ideas for renovating the cabin if he decided to buy it. New deck, better insulation, maybe a workshop in the small barn out back. The old pages about fatherhood and family values remained near the front, but he'd stopped looking at them weeks ago. They belonged to a different man with different dreams, to someone who believed in promises that turned out to be performance. He wrote, Payment 1 received. 95 payments remaining. 7 years, 11 months to go. Then he closed the notebook and set it aside. A breeze moved across the water, carrying the scent of pine and clean air. Harry leaned back in his Adirondack chair, one he'd built himself from plans found online, because building things still brought him satisfaction even if he no longer had anyone to build them for. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. He almost deleted it without looking, but something made him open it. This is Melissa, Jean's friend from the shower. I just wanted to say what you did took guts. She's telling everyone you're a monster, but those of us who saw the evidence know the truth. I hope you're doing okay. You deserve better than what she did to you." Harry stared at the message for a long moment, surprised by the gesture. Melissa had been Jean's closest friend, her maid of honor, her confidant, one of the people Harry had assumed would automatically take Jean's side regardless of evidence. Apparently, some people still value truth over loyalty. He typed back, "I'm doing well. Thank you for checking. I appreciate it." He didn't add her number to his contacts, didn't start a conversation, just acknowledged her kindness and moved on. His life now was about moving forward, not maintaining connections to the past. Other messages had come over the past months, some supportive, some accusatory, some from journalists wanting to interview him about his public revenge and viral confrontation. Harry ignored most of them. He had no interest in defending himself or explaining his choices. The 42 envelopes had said everything that needed saying. The divorce had finalized 6 weeks after the shower, exactly as Thomas had predicted. Jean hadn't fought it, couldn't fight it, really, not with the evidence so overwhelming and her legal position so indefensible. Thomas reported that her lawyer had advised immediate settlement, warning that any court battle would be expensive, public, and unwinnable. So Jean had signed the papers quietly, agreeing to every term. The divorce, the payment plan, the complete dissolution of any financial or legal connection between them. It was done. Over. Final. Norma had apparently retreated from public life in Willow Creek entirely. According to the rumor mill, information that filtered to Harry through Walter Brennan, who seemed to know everything that happened in town, Norma had moved to Portland, claiming she needed to be closer to Jean during this difficult time. Really, she'd fled the gossip and judgment she'd spent a lifetime inflicting on others. Her wealthy friends had dropped her. Her social invitations had dried up. Her reputation, so carefully cultivated over decades, had shattered in a single afternoon when her own cruelty was exposed for everyone to see. Jean had given birth in September. A healthy girl she'd named something Harry never bothered learning. Trevor Keller had apparently stepped up, moved in, and was trying to be a father. Harry hoped, genuinely, that the baby would be okay. None of this was her fault. She deserved a stable life, even if her parents were people who'd built their relationship on betrayal. But she wasn't Harry's problem anymore. Wasn't his responsibility. Wasn't his daughter. That thought no longer hurt the way it had in those first days after reading the text messages. Now it was just fact, neutral, unchangeable, requiring no emotional response. Like knowing the sky was blue or water was wet. Just information without weight. The sun climbed higher, burning through the morning clouds. Harry stood and walked to the edge of his porch, breathing in the cooling autumn air. He'd started running again, something he'd quit years ago when renovation projects consumed his free time. Now he ran 5 miles every morning, following trails that wound through pine forests and along ridge lines with views that made him understand why people move to places like this. Tomorrow he'd drive in a bend and meet with a realtor about possibly buying the cabin. The owner, an elderly man named Frank who'd built it 30 years ago, was ready to sell to someone who'd appreciate the place. Harry had the money. Jean's payments, combined with what he'd saved from the house sale, meant he could buy outright with cash. No mortgage, no debt, no ties to anyone or anything except what he chose. His phone buzzed one more time. Another notification, this one from Thomas Reed's office. Final legal fees settled. Case officially closed. You're free. Congratulations, Harry. You earned this. Harry read the message twice, then set his phone face down on the porch rail. Free. He was free in every sense that mattered. Legally, financially, emotionally. Free from a marriage built on lies. Free from a family that had never really existed. Free from the weight of betrayal and the burden of anger and the exhausting work of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. He opened his notebook one last time that morning and wrote, "Freedom achieved. Focus forward." Then he stepped off his porch and walked down to the lake. The water was cold against his hands when he dipped them in, clear enough to see smooth stones on the bottom and small fish darting between them. An eagle called from somewhere overhead, sharp and clean, cutting through the morning quiet. Harry stood there for a long time, watching light shift across the water and listening to the forest wake around him, feeling the weight of the past 3 months settle into something manageable. Not forgotten, he'd never forget, but integrated, learned from, transformed into strength rather than bitterness. Jean would be making payments for years, a monthly reminder that actions had consequences, that betrayal carried weight, that the quiet engineer she dismissed as boring and predictable had been anything but. Norma would spend the rest of her life knowing her demand for him to disappear had backfired spectacularly, that in trying to remove him, she destroyed everything she valued instead. And Harry would live here, in this cabin by this lake, building a new life on a foundation that couldn't be shaken because it was built entirely by him, for him, owing nothing to anyone except what he chose to give. He didn't forgive. Wouldn't ever forgive, really, because forgiveness implied that what they'd done was somehow forgivable, that enough time or remorse could erase the deliberate cruelty of planning someone's disposal while smiling in their face. He didn't forget. Every detail was still sharp and clear. The text messages, Norma's words, Jean's performance, the moment he'd realized the baby wasn't his. Those memories were permanent, carved into him like his name in stone. But he'd moved beyond them, built something new from the rubble, constructed a life that was his alone, answerable to no one, compromised by nothing. He'd simply won. And every month, when Jean's payment arrived, when that notification appeared on his phone announcing $1,200 deposited to his account, he'd be reminded of exactly how completely he'd won. She'd asked him to disappear, and he had, but he'd taken everything with him when he left.